Welcome to the top 5 fonts for horror movie posters, curated by Andy Story, a professional movie poster art director straight out of Hollywood. The horror movie genre has some amazing classics that are still relevant today. One known example of this is the almost 100 years old film Nosferatu, 1922, which in its time was inspired by avant-garde artistic movements such as Art Nouveau and Expressionism. The font selected for its title was Berthold Herald Reklameschrift BQ by Heinz Hoffmann, and it fully captured the essence of the film. This is the goal for every designer in charge of choosing a font to use for the title logo of a horror film in the movie posters. You need to select a type that will speak to the target audience in the right way. In today's video, we'll see 5 of the most common typography trends in the industry of horror movie posters. Trends that have become so because they achieve the difficult task of representing horror through type. Number 5. Helvetica and Rosemary's Baby. Sure, when we think about horror movies and typography, we generally imagine red words leaking blood or trembling. But in fact, not all fonts for horror movie posters need to be especially flashy or distinguishable. Do you know how Stephen King, the god of horror, always manages to create terrifying situations out of the most common elements ever? Your dog, your car, your kid, your parents. The most familiar things in life are turned into blood-freezing horror in the hands of Stephen King, and the industry of poster designs has not ignored this phenomenon. After all, there are like 60 different movies based on his books. What makes the most interesting kind of horror is not always the obviously extreme, but the subtly subverted. Many designers choose a font as common as Helvetica for horror movie posters to point out that there are strange, terrifying things lurking behind what's known or even what's loved. What better example than Rosemary's Baby, 1968? The horror cult classic by Roman Polanski uses none other than Helvetica new medium in its poster, with a slight modification that ties both words of the title together, symbolizing the bond between Rosemary and her child. And let's not forget Poltergeist, 1982, as that title treatment was Helvetica outlined. And speaking of Poltergeist and outlines, there is a beginner's tutorial on this channel showing you how to create your own Poltergeist title treatment in Photoshop and how to add outlines to your typography. Check it out! Number 4. ITC Serif Gothic and Halloween. From the 70s on, one of the most commonly used types for horror movie posters was no doubt ITC Serif Gothic, created by Tony DeSpigno and Herb Lubalin around 1972. ITC stands for International Typeface Corporation, a company owned by Lubalin. ITC Serif Gothic kinda speaks on its own. I mean, this font was used so much that DeSpigno, a type designer, actually has an entry on Wikipedia. ITC Serif Gothic has been said to be the one thing that stays coherent through the whole Star Wars saga, which honestly, it's quite impressive. It appeared in some of the merch for the shark-related horror film Jaws, 1975, but it was also the official type of horror hit that premiered a few years later, Halloween, 1978. Halloween was directed by John Carpenter and is one of the most undeniable horror classics of all time. This movie not only established the beginning of a saga that already has a dozen movies, and it's probably making more thanks to Danny McBride, it also established a lot of the tropes of the horror genre. Its poster has also become a long-loved classic, and the font used for the title? ITC Serif Gothic Heavy. The font works because it was modern and elegant at the same time, and both the borders of the type as the pumpkin in the poster's background with a bright orange colour largely associated with Halloween. The 70s were simpler times. A mysterious hand holding a knife and a killer font were enough to induce fear. The simplicity and brilliance of the typeface worked so well that it was then overused like crazy for horror films during the 80s. Proof of this is the nostalgia-based Netflix horror show Stranger Things, 2016, uses another ITC font, ITC Bengat. If you have enjoyed and learned something from this scary and freaky font video, please hit that like button to help our channel grow. Thanks! Number 3. Trajan and A Nightmare on Elm Street. It is a sad fact in human history that every empire shall fall, and ITC's reign over horror movie posters was no exception. No, once the 80s were over, so was that trend, and a new one began to arise. Carol Twombly created in 1989 a font that would not only conquer horror movie posters, but movie posters in general. The 90s saw the rise of Trajan. This font is easy to read and easy to edit to add interesting effects that will modify its personality. It is also majestic enough to elevate even the worst cinematic projects. Maybe it's because the font calls the Roman Empire to mind, which in turn is kind of associated with the roots of the Western civilization, but Trajan simply seems to be appropriate for every film project that aims to cause a shock. So of course, it works for horror movie posters. Prom Night, 2008, Trajan. The Human Centipede, 2009, Trajan. The Conjuring, 2013, Trajan. The Last House on the Left, 2009, Sinister, 2012, Nightmare on Elm Street, 2010, Pompeii, 2014. Well, if it's not exactly Trajan, it certainly derives from it. Number 2. Futura and Scream. Helvetica is not the only mainstream typeface that made its way into the industry of horror movie posters. There are many common elements in life that can be perverted and turned into something scary. In fact, remember Futura from our top 5 fonts used in comedy posters? And from our top 10 fonts used in action posters? Well, Futura might be the font with the most versatile personality of all time, because it's also a big thing in horror posters. Early examples go as far as Kubrick's existential horror classic, 2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968. But Futura Extra Bold, or a very similar font, has also been used for a much more recent Kubrick film, the disturbing thriller, Eyes Wide Shut, 1999. And that same font was slightly modified for the horror movie classic, Scream, 1996. Number 1. Custom-made fonts and Night of the Living Dead. Okay, so much for subtle subversions, but what about actual blood dripping, red trembling fonts for horror movie posters? Well, the fun ones are custom made. That was the case with the poster for the Rocky Horror Picture Show, 1975, and God bless the internet. The astigmatic font designers took the trouble of creating a quite similar font called Rocky AOE. The original A Nightmare on Elm Street, 1984, used an original font designed by Dan Perry. Long before that, when Perry wasn't yet known in the industry, he built his way up when he redesigned the Weiss Titling font to create the title sequence of The Exorcist, 1973. Stanley Kubrick didn't always settle for Futura or Futura Extra Bold, you know. He also went for customized typography sometimes. There's a sort of urban legend going on about the crazy requirements that the director demanded from famous movie poster designer Saul Bass regarding the font for the movie title. Yes, we have urban legends about typography and movie posters, okay? We like fonts and movies. The point is that Kubrick was crazy demanding, but the resulting font is amazing. There's a similar version called Shining NFI Demo. Anyway, let's move on. Have we already talked about zombies? No way we're ending a video about horror movie posters without talking about zombies. Night of the Living Dead, 1968, was groundbreaking for the movie horror genre and the industry of horror movie posters. The original lettering of the film's poster opened the door to many other typefaces of the sort because it installed the branding of zombie-themed films. A close enough font is Diana, created by Chris Hansen, who actually took the font of the original movie poster as reference. But if you're not sold on that one, this might be your time to try and design your own horrifying typeface. The good news is that this channel is packed full of tutorials showing you how to create horror movie poster title treatments in the industry standard program, Photoshop. If this video was helpful, please hit that like button and look out for more scary and educational movie poster content in the near future.